Welcome to the Worth Listening podcast, where we focus on having positive and productive conversations around money. I'm your host, Lauren, a 4-time Olympian and certified financial planner. On this show, my guests share their money stories. Everyone has a unique story and experiences both wins and losses when it comes to money. My intent is to give listeners something they can relate to, something that builds their courage to be open and take control of their own money story. When I'm not creating a great show for my listeners, I'm running my company, Worth Winning, where I help individuals and families organize their finances. Check us out at worth-winning.com. All right, now on with the show. Wayne, I am so excited to have you on the show today. It has been a long time coming. We've been talking about doing this, but it is happening. Welcome to the Worth Listening podcast.
Lauren, I'm grateful for the invitation and looking forward to it as we're starting this new year. We have a lot of exciting things to discuss today, so let's jump to it.
All right. Well, let's just introduce you to the audience a little bit. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about where you're from and what your childhood memories were like?
Wow, you're going to introduce me, but I thought that everybody in the world knew me. So you're telling me I need to start from square one, okay?
After this podcast, everyone is going to know you. This is the moment. This is your time to shine. After this, everyone in the world is going to know you.
Well, okay, so this is my intro into being a world influencer. So my name is Wayne Lomax. I'm originally from a little town called Curry, North Carolina, which is southeastern North Carolina, just north of Wilmington. I was born in that area, but did not grow up there. My dad was in the military. So we moved every 2 to 3 years. The longest I'd ever lived any place was when I went to college, and I stayed at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, 4 years. And so I'd never lived any place that long. Growing up in military life is always transition, constant transition, constant movement. So now I'm here in Florida.
Okay, so let's go backwards a little bit. So we moved around a lot in childhood. Do you have siblings? You didn't say anything about your mom either.
Oh, that great lady. Oh, my God. Now, listen, she's the queen of queens. Let's see. Her great grandfather was a slave. She was born in the house that he built on 75 acres of land that he purchased in 1872. And so that property that was purchased by my great great grandfather, still in our family. We have that property today. The house that he built is still there. It's just recently unoccupied because of a flood that came through there in 2018, hurricane. And so, yeah, my mom was born there. My mom went to the 12th grade. She had other siblings that went to college, but she did not. But my mother was an absolute financial savant. She was great with money.
All right. This is getting interesting. Do tell us. So you're in your household growing up. What money memories do you have about childhood?
We didn't have any. That's what
It's easy to be a savant and you can make nothing into nothing more.
Oh, yeah. She could take a quarter and do miracles with it. But that is not exactly true that we didn't have any. As I said, my dad military. So we always had his earnings, always came to the house. And then my mother periodically would work part-time jobs or full-time jobs outside of the home, but not a lot of that. But he depended on her to manage the finances of the home. And so my dad, he's kind of OG kind of style dude. So he got his check. He broke her off the biggest portion of it, kept his part for whatever he was going to do, and then come back later in the month and ask her for some more money to get him through the rest of the month. So really great with money. My earliest recollection of money is just probably my mom sending us to the store and giving us some money to go to the store with a shopping list. And she always said these words:
Bring me my change.
Bring me my change. Bring me my change. She wasn't playing. Bring me my change. Every penny.
I think a lot of us had that upbringing.
Bring
me my change was definitely a thing.
Bring me my change. Yeah. So that's my earliest memory.
Do you have recollections of like an allowance or first job? Like what was going on for you in childhood with money?
Yeah, I am the original Black American Jamaican. I had a lot of jobs. But let me tell you, before I get to the jobs, my dad was not a very good money manager, but my dad was a very good vision caster. My dad understood this whole idea of developing yourself into someone. So he had this kind of a elastic structure that he imposed upon us that was rigidity. That's probably his military discipline and all of that kind of stuff. And then he had this flexibility where he would give you a lot of freedom. So the things that he told you to do, he was very serious about that. You had to get those things done. But once you got those things done, you were finished. You were pretty much free when he was around to do whatever you wanted to do. So my dad would give us, starting when I was about 10 years old, $1 a month. $1 a month. So this is like, had to be like 1965, 66, probably 1966. So let me tell you about the $1 a month. Sodas cost about 10 cents. We lived in Louisiana at the time. You get candy for a penny or two. Stuff really cheap. This is my first recollection of personal money. $1 a month. In my first month, I spent the entire dollar in about a week or a day or two. And so I'm broke for the rest of the month. And so the next month comes around and I said to myself, I'm not spending this dollar. I'm going to hold on to this one until next month. And then once I get my second dollar, I have a little bit more latitude to spend. And so that's my earliest recollection of my personal understanding of finances. I was never taught it, but I just did not like the feeling of being broke the rest of the month.
So you executed then. You remember executing? You did do, okay, I balled till I fell the first month.
I executed it like a goal line stance. I stopped poverty for the next month.
Right. So then that was the lesson in and of itself. It's like you learned, which so many of us do. You know, you get your first big girl job or first 6-figure income, I think is what a lot of people are trying to get. Like, oh, I'm trying to get to this one place. And then you get there and you're like, oh, I got to reward myself. And then you reward yourself so much that you're like, oh, 100 minus 100 equals 0 for everybody, or $10 minus 10, or 1 minus 1, you still end up in the same place. And so there has to be some guardrails in place. So it sounds like you did teach yourself sort of a lesson.
I learned it and I've never forgotten it.
Mm-hmm. All right. So let's go back to these different jobs that you did. So we got the allowance, we started learning, but you said you were the original 3-job having person.
Oh, yeah. Well, so my family has always owned its own property. That's both on my father's side and my mother's side. And so every kid has to work. My grandfather, who was a farmer, employed us to work his tobacco crops. And so that's my first job, was really working in the tobacco fields at the demand, not the request or suggestion, at the demand of my grandfather. So we all got up, everybody loaded up, and you went to the tobacco field. Secondly, I worked in the blueberry field. So my grandparents were on their own property, but they would be probably textbook definition poor, but they owned their own property. So they didn't have a lot of money. So we had to go to blueberry farms with my grandmother, my aunt, and all of the women in the community went to the blueberry farms. One of the blueberry farm owners was a guy named Barnhill. It's Barnhill Blueberries. You can Google it in North Carolina, Barnhill Blueberries. That is my mother's maiden name. My great-great-grandfather was a slave that was owned by the Barnhill family. And so we're picking blueberries for the Barnhills still in the 1960s and 70s, paying 75 cents for 12 pints of blueberries in the hot blazing sun. And so these women who were really good at it, who had to feed children and grandchildren, could pick about, a tray had 12 pints in it. They could pick about 30 of those. And they would get 75 cents for each one. So you multiply 75 times 30, whatever that is. That's not $30 a whole day. And this is in the 1970s, 60s and 70s. Yeah.
With less inflation, but that's still a pretty low income, even in the 70s. Yeah.
So I did that. Then I went from there to, once I moved kind of away from my grandparents' reach, I had a lawnmower, I had to cut our grass, and I started cutting grass in the community. So I had my own little lawn service I did. I used to do that. I used to deliver newspapers when I moved to New Jersey. So in 11th, 12th grade, I went to high school in New Jersey. I had a paper delivery route, and nothing is worse than a January in New Jersey when it's snow and ice and it's Sunday. Monday through Saturday. Oh, but Sunday, that Sunday paper. Oh my God.
Because it's so heavy.
It's so heavy. And you couldn't take them all at the same time. So you have to make 2 or 3 routes to come back because they're so big and it's cold and oh yeah.
It sounds like you were taught a great work ethic via that paper route.
Oh my God. And my dad didn't help me. I do it by myself. So after the paper route, I worked at what was called the Money Memoir. So it was a little store on the post. It was a convenience store, like a military 7-Eleven. And I worked in there. And then I was off to college.
Okay. So tell us about what happened. How did you do the college planning process? In high school, is it like you definitely have to go to college? Was that something from your household? Was there money saved up to be able to go to college? Was it going to be figure it out yourself? I would imagine that the cost of going to college is not quite like it is.
Hey, go back to that one just before, the cost of going to college, that figure it out yourself one. Right. That was the option. That was the option. Yeah, it wasn't the money is saved up. It wasn't conversations about it. It was really figure it out yourself, because my parents came from an environment that once you became an adult, whether you dropped out of school and you decided you were an adult and you started working, or you went to the military or whatever it was, once you became an adult in those environments, then you really were on your own. And so I think that kind of mindset pretty much was transferred to them. And that's how they kind of dealt with us. At least that's how I feel like they dealt with me. And so I really didn't know what I was going to do after high school, except I figured I needed to go to college. So I applied to a couple, and my counselor in high school recommended that I look at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. That's where I started. That was my first 2 years of school.
So you get to college, and is there an environment change for you in a sense of like the way that you thought about money from birth through high school up to now? You're like, oh, okay, I'm seeing different people from different parts of the country. I'm in a different part of the country. Was there something that you noticed that was different about money during your college years?
As I reflect on it, I understand how the lack of money can put you in a situation where you could be behind. Because I got to college and didn't understand what the whole college financial experience was about. And so the very first day, I didn't know that I didn't have enough money to pay for the tuition and the fees to go to college. I had no idea. And so they're telling me, okay, you don't have enough money, so you have to get some loans. So that's day one, standing in this long line in order for the person to tell you, you got to get this loan. But, for the college, to get those loans was money for the federal government to support the institution. But you don't know that you're a part of that system. So from day one, I'm in debt, day one. So I can go to college because I can't go back. And so I didn't know anything about that. So I did get college loans for my first 2 years. But it's nothing like the loans today. Those loans may have come up to a total of about $3,000, maybe $4,000 total.
Good Lord, that's a lot of money.
I know, but I only did it for 2 years. And then after that, I refused to take any loan.
So you worked your way through the second 2 years because you didn't want to end up in a bunch of debt.
Yeah, that's correct.
And so what kind of jobs were you doing while working or while going to school full time? College life.
Well, I transferred from Lincoln University, where I had student loan debt, transferred to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where I refused to take out any loans. And so I guess I got some scholarships and some grants to go to school there. But I had some jobs. One of the jobs was at a place, it's a pretty obscure place. You probably have never heard of it. But I used to be behind the counter at a place called McDonald's. And back then, they had a very small menu, burgers, fries, and shakes. And that's pretty much all that was on there, But I worked at McDonald's. I worked in the audiovisual lab on campus. And I then landed a job with the Environmental Protection Agency as a student. My undergraduate major was chemistry.
Okay. What were you planning to do with your chemistry degree?
I was planning to be an anesthesiologist. And so, I'm a pastor, and people say that I actually do the same thing. They come every week to be anesthetized. So
it's so funny how, the road that we end up on, right?
Yeah, our church's slogan, if you need a good nap, I have the church for you. So, yeah, but I was planning to be a medical doctor. Anesthesiologist is what I wanted to do. That was my dream from 7th grade. Got bumped off the road and never got back on. I tried several times, but never was successful with that. And so I am pastoring a church.
So tell us a little bit about how the road post-collegiately played itself out for you. How did you get from finish college and interested in being a physician to now I am a pastor and have been for quite a while?
While at Chapel Hill, I started working as a chemist for the Environmental Protection Agency. That was undergrad as a student. And then once I graduated, they hired me full time. So I was working for a couple years as a chemist. And I had a carpool situation that we used to travel from a place called Cary, North Carolina, over to Research Triangle Park, where Environmental Protection Agency was. And I used to pass by this prison every day, young felons. These guys were juveniles and they had committed felons. And so I guess I said a prayer, what can I do to help these kids in this prison? And I used to go over there and the chaplain allowed me to teach a Bible study every night. So I'm just a young guy, I like to read the Bible. I was learning stuff about it. So he let me do it. And so one night he walked me out. He asked me, he said, well, listen, have you ever thought about going to seminary? I said, no. I said, not really. He said, well, you should go. And so I was really kind of into my whole Christian faith at that time. Everything revolved around that. And so I applied to school in Kentucky, Southern Seminary, and got accepted to seminary, which is another interesting money story because I worked 2 jobs while I was at the Environmental Protection Agency. So I worked from 8 to 4 as a chemist. And from 4 to midnight, I worked as a security guard in the same building. So once I parked my car, I was on that property from 8 o'clock in the morning to midnight. So it's funny. I said, those people must have had more faith in God than me because I wouldn't let myself protect anything that's of any value. I had the uniform and everything.
Why were you pulling doubles? What were you trying to accomplish? A financial goal of some sort? Was that to make ends meet?
Now, here's the thing about it. It wasn't to make ends meet, but it was really to try to get ahead. I could support myself. I was married at the time. I was could support myself. My wife was a teacher. And so we could support ourselves on both of those incomes, but I was trying to really get rid of those student loans and really try to get ahead. And so that's why I worked those 2 jobs. It's pretty crazy, but 22, 23. So.
All right. So we're back in seminary. Let's head back over there. And you said that's also an interesting, funny story. So you go from working 2 jobs to seminary. What happens over there?
0 jobs. And now I'm in school full time. But I happened to get a grant that paid for my entire seminary. They would write me a check every semester. And Southern Seminary, they didn't charge any, if you were a part of a Southern Baptist church, you didn't have to pay tuition. And so you just paid the fees. And so from the check, I had all the rest of the money from that check actually came into my bank account. So I always had more money left over. So I actually left seminary with more money than I went to seminary with.
Oh, so this worked itself out.
That worked itself out. Yeah.
All right. So now you're done with seminary. You got a nice little emergency fund or a little stack. Do you feel ahead when you leave seminary? Because you were trying to get ahead working those 2 jobs at the EPA.
Not really. I didn't feel ahead. Didn't even feel really financially secure. I had some savings, but I'm now moving from Louisville, Kentucky to South Florida. I've got a child and a wife. The church that hired me, they weren't used to dealing with staff and they put us up in a hotel. And we're in this hotel for like 3 or 4 weeks. We don't even have a place to stay. We're just trying to figure out, where we're going to stay. And so we finally rented this house down the street from the church. And I have to thank my first wife for this because she said to me, we could do better. We bought a house. And I'm saying, how can we buy a house? We're down here. It's more expensive. We don't have enough money. I was making $18,000. That was my salary. But I went upstairs and I did like Jed Clampett and I started ciphering. And so People listening to this probably don't know who Jed Clampett is and what that ciphering reference is. But when I put the pencil to paper, it really was financially more feasible to try to buy a house than to keep renting. And so that's what we did. And we bought a house and that worked out pretty well. We spent more for the house than we should have. We were green. We didn't know how to do it. And the guy who sold us the house, his wife was the mortgage provider. So he had a whole hookup there. They're getting the money every possible way from us. But the money that I'd saved allowed us to have enough for a down payment.
I love it. What I wanted to kind of shed light on today is preachers are people too. And so we're now at the beginning of your seminary journey. But if anything has come to light in this conversation, it's been that preachers are people too. You now are figuring out student loans. You go from figuring out student loans to you're married with children. And there's a responsibility that comes along with being a family unit in a household and keeping a roof over people's head and raising a child and making sure that they're okay. And you just told us a story of this idea of being able to purchase a home, not having a lot of income at the moment of that happening, but figuring out how to do that because you also have a family that needs to be taken care of. And I think it's one of those things like $18,000 is not a lot of money.
No.
I'd imagine no matter what time frame we're talking about in this chronology, that it was a very humble amount to have to live on with a wife and a child, but you were able to make it work.
Yeah, it made it work for a while, but it did hit a crisis point. Most churches weren't used to compensating people based on what their market value was. And so church, at least in those days, tend to have somewhere in the backdrop this kind of everybody's poor mentality and be happy and be poor and not have enough and struggle. It's kind of an oxymoron where you're constantly singing and praying about these blessings, you're blessed and blessed and blessed. You can't hardly pay your bills. And so what happened is that my youngest kid, we were traveling to go on a little vacation trip, and my youngest kid had seizures in the car. And he just started convulsing, and we're somewhere in the middle of Florida, heading to North Carolina in the rural area. We take the first exit we could find, and it was somewhere around Rockledge by Cape Canaveral. Stop by the fire station. Listen, our kid is sick. Can somebody help us? They said, well, we can't, but the hospital is wherever it was. So we end up having that kid in the hospital for about 4 days up there till they got him settled. No insurance, no health insurance at all. $18,000. That's what my salary was. And so while the kid is trying to get himself together, you're preoccupied on the kid getting well. But then that day comes, well, Mr. Lomax, you and your family will be able to check out today. You can go down to the finance office. And the lady told me the bill. And I told her, I said, well, ma'am, I can't pay that. And she said, we'll put you on a payment plan. And that's what they did. They put me on a payment plan. But at that point, I knew that I was not in a financial position to take care of my family.
4 days in the hospital is probably a large percentage of your salary for the course of the year at that point.
Yeah. So I had to start functioning differently and dealing with the church differently and trying to deal with my personal finances in a different way.
So let's talk a little bit about in ministry, there are different ways to be compensated. What are some of the different ways that people who work in ministry can be compensated?
Well, you can rob, cheat, and steal. Yeah. So I felt like I got robbed. Well, you did. On a serious note, usually with ministers, you can be a salaried individual, contracted. The church can have a contract with you that will compensate you this much. And that contract could contain things like a salary, housing allowance, could be an auto allowance. They could agree to pay your benefits or not. They could have educational benefits in there for you. Could be in the contract that after so many years, you can have sabbatical and the church will pay for that sabbatical. Not just for recreation, but it's healthy for the church if the pastor is healthy. It's a very intense job. Compensation can look like that. Some ministers are very gifted, so they write. Some have lots of products and services that they offer to people for compensation. Streams of income can be very diverse.
Okay, so there's lots of different ways you can earn a living. You said this $18,000 wasn't going to work. Did you go to a different church so that you could be compensated differently? How did you make the pivot to something that was going to be a better life for you to be able to take care of your family?
Yeah, so I stayed at that church 12 years. And so I didn't leave. I asked for a salary increase. So they increased me from 18,000 to 36,000. So that helped. Secondly, I got a part-time job teaching at a local community college. So I started teaching world religions at a community college. So that helped. Then there would be periodically, I might have an opportunity to teach or preach or be a part of some type of instructional experience where they compensated me for it. So that helped. Usually in those instances, if I got a chance to preach or teach and I got compensated for it, I didn't spend that money. I would take that money and I would just, at that time, put it in the bank. I just put it in the bank, but I wouldn't spend it at all. For years, I just kept it because what I figured, I don't really need this money to live on. I can make it without it. And so since I can survive without this, I didn't expect it to come. I didn't think I was going to have it. So I just put it aside and I started putting it aside until I could pay off all the student loans. I typically only carry two types of debt, home and a car.
Okay. I like it. I like it. And I think that brings up a good point. We talk a lot about that on this podcast. The idea for people who have fluctuating income, a way to be able to stabilize it is to like find out what your baseline expenses are. And then anything that comes in above and beyond that kind of gets set to the side. You had stable income, but you also had this extra income. And that extra income was what was unstable. So it's like something that you couldn't necessarily count on. You knew your baseline expenses, you knew you could live off of what your baseline income was. And now being able to set aside this extra money that you weren't necessarily able to count on, that was kind of fluctuating. It wasn't something that was always coming in. It came here or there, to pretend as if it didn't exist. That way you could help yourself reach your financial goals.
Right.
Were you talking to your congregation, there we go, about money?
Well, then I was on staff, so I didn't have a lot of pulpit time or FaceTime with the congregation, but I probably was able to host a series of financial workshops while I was there. So we would do stuff like debt management. That's usually the approach in the Black community. We always start with debt, get your credit score right, how to buy a house, that kind of stuff. And so we probably did some of those types of things. But since I've been pastoring, I've had a whole wider range of financial training opportunities that I've offered. I've talked about it from the pulpit. I preach about it. I'm a very strong believer in the power of money managed well. And so I tried to communicate that. I had a conversation with a young lady yesterday who was 23 years old. She just blew my mind because she was sharing with me that she's already saved $10,000. And then she is investing in cryptocurrencies. And so she said that she lost some money in cryptocurrency. Someone had kind of chided her for losing money, but she said, but what I gained in knowledge was worth the $500 I lost. So I said, yeah, you'll be rich one day.
What are you seeing among young professionals as the kind of money themes or money pain points that they're coming up against?
Well, I would say that you remember I told you the story about my grandmother going to the blueberry farm in the morning, staying from 7 o'clock in the morning and getting home about 6 o'clock in the evening, coming back with 20 some dollars in her pocket all day. And she wasn't old when that was happening. She seemed old to me, but she wasn't really that old. But what I'm seeing with young people are a couple of things. One, there is a group of young professionals, and I function primarily in a people of color world, African Americans, people of African descent. I have the opportunity of seeing a lot of young Black professionals who are approaching their finances in a totally different way than in the past. And I'll tell you, from your world as a professional athlete, the sports world, there used to be a term that you don't hear anymore, dumb jock. You don't even hear that word anymore because these athletes, many of them are understanding early that they're in a business and that they have an opportunity and a small window in that opportunity to take advantage of the lucrative contracts that they have. And so you see many of them doing just phenomenal things. So I see it in the sports world. I see it in the professions, whether it's education, law, medicine, architecture, these young people who are really doing some phenomenal things with money. But I also see the other side where I live in a community where it's hard to even get many of the kids to take an SAT prep class to understand that college admission is about preparation. So they may have parents or live in a household where they're financially insecure. And so there's a great deal of that. So if I only looked at the professional community, I could be blinded and believe that because I function in that environment quite a bit, that's the way the world is. But there's a larger community. It's massive, where the financial insecurity is totally overwhelming. And these things that we're talking about now are totally foreign. The last thing, the 22-year-old that I talked to last night, I asked her this question. I said, how much money would you need to have for you to feel like you didn't need any more money? What would that number be? She said to me, she said, I've never thought about that. She said, I only think about earning six figures. I want to get to a place where I earn six figures. I said, that's a good starting point to want to earn six figures. I said, but she was a former track athlete too. So I said, the end goal of track, you never get in a track race in order to get in the blocks well. You get in the track race to get to the finish line first. So it's always about the end game. And everything is always about the end game. And so it's better for you to structure your financial aspirations around where do you want to end up. And everything else has to bow down to where you want to end up.
I love it. I love it. Hopefully she heard you when you were speaking to her yesterday. I think that's a great segue into what are you doing financially now? So you've gone on this journey. You've experienced all these different things. How are you organizing yourself and your family in order to get to the finish line first?
Have you ever heard of Al Davis, who used to own the Oakland Raiders?
No, I don't know him.
Yeah. Well, Snoop Dogg has a line from Al Davis in one of his songs. He said, Al Davis said it right, just win, baby, win. That's what Al Davis used to say about football, just win, baby, win. He asked me, what am I doing now? I'm just spin, baby, spin.
No.
No, just teasing. So at this stage of my life, I'm 65, just discovered Medicare. And so that's supposed to be a blessing, but you got to understand how it works. And so I'm really trying to organize for my last stages of life. So it's looking at everything. And so my finances are a lot more complicated than they were when I moved to Florida. So now, I own a home and some other properties, some in Florida, some out of Florida. I have investments. I have some aspirations to do some things. I have retirement monies and all the kind of stuff like that. So really, now it's making sure that I have the end of life documents in order. So that's a priority. The second priority, I haven't retired yet. And so the other priority is making sure that I can exit the ministry and live a lifestyle that I'm comfortable with.
I love it. So in general, we have young professionals listening to this podcast. You've graduated from the young professional aspect of life. Talk to your 30-year-old self. What are some things you wish you would have done?
Yeah, so if I was talking to my 30-year-old self, I would tell my 30-year-old self to continue with the delayed gratification that I had during that time of my life. I was very good at that. But don't stack all that money up in a bank. Very early on, maybe get with somebody, a trusted financial advisor who can help you to invest that money, to teach you, and not just to invest the money for you, but to teach you about investing, because it's not a good thing, in my opinion, for somebody to invest your money for you without you learning how investing works, what they're doing, how much they're getting paid, what are the different options, what are the tax ramifications of this type of investment, all that kind of stuff. So I would say to my 30-year-old self, don't stack all that money up in the bank. Get with a trusted investor, someone to help you invest your money, and have a more long-term plan. That would be the first thing I would do. And then I would say to my young self is that if I was interested and I had some extra money, to be willing to take some risk, to be willing to take some long-term risk with the money that wasn't required for my retirement or my daily survival, to be willing to take some risk. So that might be purchasing a piece of real estate. Owning real estate is a great thing, but there's risk in it and there's headaches with it. So no matter what anybody tells you, oh, you can make a lot of money, or yeah, you can make money, you can lose money, And it's also headaches with this rental property, commercial, or if it's residential, they all come with this other side to it that have a lot of complexities and difficulties. So, but I would say that be willing to do it. When I married the second time, my current wife, Teresa, owned a house. I owned a house. And if we had kept both of those houses, I'd probably be retired now. I probably would have sold them now and, walked away, and I'd be somewhere chilling. Doing this podcast from the beach.
Right.
Yeah.
Coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Yeah.
All right. So you have some children. How many children do you have?
I have 3.75.
3.75. How are you talking about? I'm not even going to go. I'm not asking you about the 3.75. How are you talking to those 3.75 children about money, about your finances and their finances?
Well, to the 0.75 kid, the 3/4 of a kid, is 7 years old, and I already have a brokerage account open for him. He had a savings account in the bank, and I told him he needed to take his money out of the savings account and put it in an investment account. And so he kept asking me, when am I going to put my money in an investment account? So I said, we're going to open up a brokerage account for you. And so we did that. And so I told him, I said, every trade that we make, we're going to do it together. So that's what I'm doing with him. Now, so I moved to the whole kid. The third kid is a girl. So she's still trying to get her footing professionally and financially and all of that. And I'm doing the best I can to help without enabling. And so I have parameters that I won't cross generally with my grown adult kids. And, I want them to be independent. So I don't insert myself into their decisions, but I help where I can. And I draw my own lines with them in terms of what I will do and what I won't do. My middle son, we probably talk most about money. He moved to California. I didn't want him to move to California. I said, it's very expensive in California, but he moved to California and he's never asked for a penny since he moved to California. So he seems to be very good at what he does, but we talk a lot about money. He's interested in investing, any type of investment opportunity that we talk about. He's always for it. And he likes the idea of partnership and that kind of thing. And then whole son, number one, we talk a lot about money also, but he's just opened his own practice. And so he's very busy doing his own thing. But we all can talk very openly about money at this point.
So you were very strategic and intentional about creating an environment to be able to discuss finances with your children?
Oh, yeah. What I used to do with them, we always talked about money. Once they got to like middle school, I would always ask them, do you want to buy lunch or do you want us to make your lunch? They said, I want to buy lunch. I said, okay, I'm going to give you all of your lunch money at the beginning of the semester. So if lunch was $1 a day, it's 90 days, you get $90. I said, you can spend it all or you can spend $1 a day. Whatever you want to do, that's yours. If you spend it all, you have to fix your own lunch each day. Nobody's going to prepare it for you. I did that from middle school all the way through high school. They always prefer write me the check, give me the cash, give me my money now. And they learned to manage it well, and it worked well for them. I had a relative kid to come live with us for a while, didn't understand that he hadn't had that kind of exposure all the time. He's in 11th grade. So my oldest son's in the same grade as he is. So I gave him the same option. He spent all the money the first week.
But he probably learned a similar lesson to you when you spent that $1 for the month in the first week.
I don't know. But that just speaks to the power of early exposure and training. And so when you expect people to do things that they have not had the exposure and training to do, it is usually a recipe for failure.
Exposure and training is everything. That is why this podcast exists, so that we can have pertinent money discussions and people can feel more comfortable talking about money. You also mentioned estate planning being something that is important to you right now. Is that something you're talking to your children about? And as you plan for your estate, those are people I would assume might be included in that. What kind of discussions are you having about, in my untimely passing or unplanned we're all going to pass at some point. But if something happens to me, this is where you look for the documents, or what are you thinking about as it pertains to estate planning, and how are you including your family in that discussion?
That's so funny. The word untimely passing. Well, what time was it supposed to be?
It's a good point. It's a good point.
Yeah. So there are a couple things. One is to make sure you have your end of life documents in order and that they're clear. So that's a will. A couple of the kids need to have probably trust. The other thing is that I have some wishes. And so I have property that I own in North Carolina that's been in my family since 1872. So of the 75 acres that my great-great-grandfather purchased, I own about 20 of those acres myself. It's my desire that these kids not sell that property unless the offer is so lucrative, it's a game changer. But otherwise, do not sell that property. Pay the taxes on that property. It's $400 or $500 a year, rural property, but do not sell that property. And I get offers to buy that property all the time for nothing, pennies, but do not sell that property unless it's a game changer. You know, somebody offer you $3 or $4 or $5 million for it. You might say, well, hey, great-great-grandfather, we appreciate it. It was a good run.
Right.
Yeah, we got to exit here. So that's one of my desires. Then my own end of life desire. Do I want to be cremated? I have talked to them about those kind of things. I personally don't want to put $20,000+ in the dirt. I don't want to do it. I want to spend the $5,000 to $10,000 to rent the casket at the funeral. I said, you know, why should I pay for you to come see me? You know? I don't get it. You know, y'all want to pay to see me? Cool. So I'm talking about those things. My own grave is that I don't need to have a plot. My parents have these big ledgers on top of their resting place. Just get the people to come out there, engrave my name on one of theirs, because you only go to the cemetery to read. You don't go to see nobody. You go to the cemetery to read what's there. You know, when you're born, when you die. I remember, yeah. So those are some of the things talking about. Talking to my wife a lot about, okay, I've managed most of this stuff myself. I said, okay, you got to learn, you got to understand where this is, what that is, how this works. Very important. So those kind of things.
I love it. I love it. I love it. As we wrap up, is there anything that you feel like you want to share with the audience about anything about your money story that you feel like is pertinent?
Yeah. You know, I like speaking to younger audiences because you have an opportunity. Nothing is guaranteed, but you have an opportunity to prepare yourself for the days when you can't work, or when you can work and nobody wants to hire you. You know, so I would say, you know, just take that very seriously and delay some gratification, stack some money up, surround yourself with some professionals such as yourself. I mean, you're helping dozens of people, Lauren, with your education, your services that you're providing. So people can take advantage of that by reaching out to you, letting you help them achieve their financial goals. I'm a pastor, so I don't spend much time dealing with the nuts and bolts of finances. I really need help. And then find someone who is also going to be a financial educator and not just a financial investment product selling professional.
Ooh, amen. That was the word right there.
Yeah.
All right. We have made it to what I like to refer to as the spinal sprint. I know you're an avid listener to the podcast, so
Yes.
You might have seen some people do this. Are you ready?
Let's go.
You got $20 in your pocket. What do you spend it on?
A Whopper. It's fries. A Coke for me and my wife.
Okay, I was like, it's gotten more expensive, but it's not going to cost you $20. But yeah, for two, you're right.
Two might cost you that now. Yeah, $20 a day, I probably buy something to eat.
Worst advice you've ever received?
Don't start a church.
Best advice you've ever received?
Don't spend all the money.
Okay. Something you do for fun that doesn't cost anything.
Ride my bike.
Well, yeah, we didn't talk anything about the bike riding. All right, what about your worst money habit?
I'm an addict to fast food.
Not good for you and not good for your wallet.
I look over my shoulder when I go through the drive-thru. Is anybody watching me? That's probably my worst money habit is time I ask myself, how much money have I spent on cheeseburgers?
What is your fast food place of choice?
Oh, Chick-fil-A.
They do have some good lemonade.
Yeah.
All right. Best money habit.
Oh, best money habit by far, delayed gratification, not spending because it's there.
Okay. I like it. Finish this sentence. That awkward financial moment when
you and your mate don't agree on what to do with these assets.
Ooh, that's a whole nother episode right there. That is an awkward financial moment too.
Yeah.
All right. We have made it to the finish line. You are standing on the podium. You have won the worth listening listeners' hearts, and you're standing on the podium with this gold medal around your neck. This is your time to shine. Please do tell us how we can support you, where we can find you, what you're up to, all the things. Because I told you at the beginning of this podcast, you are now world famous.
That's right. Well, you can find me, Wayne Lomax, social media, Wayne B. Lomax, or you can also Google or search with your internet browser, The Fountain Church or thefountain.net. You can find out anything about our ministry. We have the greatest ministry in South Florida. So you'd want to check us out. Also, I am launching a podcast this year called The Elephant in the Room. And so that podcast is about discussing things that people generally don't want to talk about. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be interesting. So you can find me in those places.
Ooh, give us a little sneak peek of some of those topics that people don't want to talk about that you plan to talk about on your podcast.
Well, so I have a kind of a hybrid podcast. I'm a pastor, so some of the stuff is going to be in the pastor's world. So I'm going to talk about issues such as the LGBTQ issue in the church. I want to talk about marriage and divorce, those types of issues in the church. I want to talk about money, how money is taught in the church when we have people standing in lines, giving large sums of money under the impression that their faith is going to reciprocate in another large sum of money. And usually money, nobody who has a lot of money has ever gotten their money like that. And so I'll talk about those types of things. It's all right to give, but you have to give smart too. I'll probably talk about some political things. I'll talk about certain things, maybe like reparations, the balance between reparations and hard work planning, because if you're waiting on the government to repair us for slavery, listen, you're going to probably be dead before they get around to it. So, so you got to do something in the interim. So it's a lot of things like that, the value of voting and the futility of voting, so I want to talk about certain things like that.
I love it. Those are definitely some elephant in the room topics. So I can't wait to tune in. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you, Lauren. I enjoyed it. It was fun.